Welcome, everybody. I'm going to take just a second here for everybody to get your seats. Thank you. And my name is Catherine Jones, and I am so privileged to be able to have three fabulous women here who are representative of women in high technology. But before I let them introduce themselves, I want to say one thing to every woman in the audience, and that is, while you may not be a woman in technology, you are all technical women. And in fact, the difference between whatever you're doing today and what all of us sitting on this stage is only because of a career choice at some point in our lives. And you are probably every bit as technical as we are. And we're going to be discussing some really interesting things today. AI, what the heck is that? Blockchain, scary, huh? And virtual reality. And as we begin and as you sit down, let me start with Jessica. Please introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Jessica Griffin. I head up product for Kronos's Workforce Ready small and medium sized business platform. I've had a bit of an interesting trajectory through my career. Started out in user experience and UI and have gone back and forth between that and product management across a couple of large companies, and really excited to be looking at the intersection, how user experience and some of these emerging technologies really come to play and really come to bring innovation into what some consider, more traditional business processes. So that's what I'm excited to learn about here today with everybody.
Einat Gez, CEO, co-founder of Papaya Global. So Papaya Global is a very interesting company. We are innovating global workforce and by developing a really amazing platform to manage everything that is related to global workers, contractors, PEO, and payroll employees. Papaya is my third company to date, so I've been an entrepreneur for a while, but I took Papaya as my first challenge as a startup company and really deep diving into tech. We are VC backed, we are growing very, very rapidly, really innovating, very traditional, some will say boring, but for me it's very fascinating world of payroll and global compliance. And very excited to be here today.
Gretchen.
Hi, Gretchen Alarcon. I lead the product strategy for Oracle's HCM cloud products. I've been putting that American Studies degree to use in technology for 20 years now. So my focus, though, has been on that translation between what's happening in technology, how do we apply that to product, and then how do we make sure that that's adding value to everyone who wants to use our products.
Excellent. I love that degree as another humanist who somehow ended up being technical. So as you go around the floor today and looking at all of the vendors, there's a lot of new technology. You'll see IoT, you'll see probably robotics. We've picked three of them today that I've mentioned before. And we're going to start with kind of what are these animals, if you will. And our goal is by the end of this session, you'll have an idea of what these things are and why or if you should care. So let's look at, what is blockchain?
So many of you have probably heard about blockchain. You're probably wondering, what the heck is it? Why should I care? Is it Bitcoin? Is Bitcoin blockchain? Is blockchain Bitcoin? Really at its core, blockchain is a chain of records where that record is a chunk of information, and that information could be personal information, it could be financial information, it could be background information, but really just a traditional record. The difference is that record is contained in a distributed network across a series of public computers, as opposed to a block of information or a piece of record that is contained in a single database in one computer. So why we should care about that is because it's distributed across this network of computers, it makes it more secure. It makes it less open to hacking and anybody coming in and changing that information. So it's been around for a long time. The theory was first introduced back in the 1990s, but it was really when Bitcoin started to use this technology back in about 2008 that it first came back into popularity and folks started to look at it for other pieces of technology. So Bitcoin uses it to house their transactional records. So because Bitcoin does not exist in a standard technological infrastructure, it needs a way for it to contain its transactions. So they use that technology, the blockchain technology, to do that. And there's lots of interesting ways that HR, as well as other areas of the industry, can use that very secure, known, trusted entity to secure records and information. So definitely something I'm excited to talk about the use cases and applications for, but really just a very simple record of information at its core.
That sounds like a good beginning for us, doesn't it? What about AI? Now, let's start with what is the A actually for in your companies? Because I think there's a lot of A's going on with that I. Gretchen, what do you?
Okay, so I was the one who triggered that because we've kind of had the conversation around artificial intelligence. As soon as you say that, my brain goes to science fiction and Isaac Asimov and all of those sorts of things. Inside Oracle, we call it adaptive intelligence just because we want to talk about how things change. But we've also talked about adaptive, can you have artificial intelligence if it isn't adapting? So getting away from the words, what are we talking about when we're talking about AI? Well, we're talking about any situation where the system, the computer, is able to learn, is able to guide, is able to derive more information than just a standard transaction. And depending on where you are in the world, I will tell you, I've been traveling globally on this one, people are using different terms. In the US, it's AI. That's what everybody wants to talk to. If you go to Europe, they're talking about robotics, and they mean the exact same thing. They do not mean the Jetsons robot maid, which is really what I thought of when they first said this. In Europe, in Asia, they're talking about machine learning, and they're very specifically using that as the term. So I think what we've got going on, and this happened before when we talked about big data 5 to 10 years ago, is we've jumped on a term, but we haven't necessarily defined what goes underneath it. So as you're talking to a vendor or you're exploring it within your own organization, I have seen RFPs now showing up that say, do you have AI? And my answer is, sure, what do you want? Make sure that you're thinking about what you're trying to achieve with it, because we want to talk about the system guiding you and the system learning over time. Those are kind of the two big things that are going to then drive productivity for your organization.
So Ina, what do you think of AI? What's your A?
What's my A? So obviously artificial intelligence, but inside our company, we also use the A for automation intelligence, because for us, AI is basically taking very repetitive processes that can be replaced by machine instead of humans. So monitor compliance, monitor payroll, for example, it's something that we are doing with AI, because those things that we find that there is no real value for humans doing it, and actually AI, the automation of the processes, by using artificial and automation, can create a very interesting path where we ensure that we keep zero mistakes. We can take data and compare it on a very, very accurate way. The learning curve of basically teaching a machine to do it versus a person to do it is much, much quicker when you have a process in place. And for us, basically, the AI is not replacing the real thinking of the team that we have, but just ensuring that everything that doesn't really require thinking, that can be robust, that can be, that's an ongoing process that just need a verification, is being made by AI processes. So it's not very super challenging. We don't have robots in the offices, but we do have nice logs and protocols and servers running processes to ensure that everything is accurate and to save lots of manual workforce.
And what about Kronos? How do you describe AI?
Yeah, I think we call it artificial intelligence. That's how we've been using it internally. And you know, when we think about it, we think about how can we use all of that data that we have across all of our systems. Certainly from a Kronos perspective, we've got 45 years of workforce management data. How can we use that data in new ways? How can we define new algorithms in ways that help our customers answer their most pressing questions? It never gets rid of that human piece, right? You need that human piece and that ability to really make those those really close, conscious employee decisions, but we have lots of tools that can help them make those decisions and make them feel confident in those decisions.
Now, my next question is, are you guys all talking about the same thing or not? What do you think?
I think we are.
I think we are. I think what's happening again, because depending on where you're looking at, for those of you who follow Gartner, they've got their hype cycle. And if you've seen the hype cycle that was, I think, maybe published in August, everything on the hype cycle right now for technology, there are so many different terms. So again, we've chosen this umbrella term. But I think the thing that I did just hear all of us talk about, though, which is really important, is there's still a human at the end of the day. Right? There is still, the system is going to learn, the system's going to take away the automation and do the things that are repetitive. It's going to leverage all the data to find those connections so that a human doesn't have to spend 40 hours trying to make that happen. But at the end of the day, the person, there's still a person making the decision, because there has to be somebody who can apply judgment, who can apply empathy, who can apply some creativity, and the system's probably not going to do that. So we still want to have somebody in the driver's seat making those final decisions.
Yeah, totally agree. I think that we just make human better by taking the workload that we don't want to do as humans. But this is what AI at the end of the day is all about.
So is that the same as process automation? I mean, have we really, we've been talking about automating HR for what, 30 years? And for the most part, it was taking things that were repetitive tasks and making a machine do them. Is this the same animal? Is it the same mousetrap but another mousetrap? Or have we made a cognitive leap here so it's actually something different?
So from my point of view, it's almost like looking at autonomous cars. Okay, we can all drive, but I think that we are all waiting for the day we will not need to do it on our daily basis because we will have a nice car just driving herself. Lots changed and lots happened in HR, and I think every industry starts with understanding the problem and the pain and then going through the solution. So obviously 30 years ago, when we were saying automating processes, we meant onboarding automation and few very minor processes, while currently when we look on the big picture and the way that companies can process data and the processes that we are doing, we are completely talking about something different. But obviously technology today versus 30 years ago was nothing to be compared at. So it's very much the same, very much different. We just made a huge progress. And I think that each one of us, if we would have given the task that we would given 30 years ago on his day-to-day job, we would quit in like half an hour. So I think it's just something that basically evolving with our path in technology and our expectation of what we do with our day-to-day tasks.
So just as an example on that, so if you think about running payroll, all of us automated, or maybe it's just me, automated payroll got it off our desk as soon as possible, right? That is a repetitive thing that happens on a regular basis. No one's ever going to give you a bonus for running payroll well, but they're certainly going to have a lot to say if you don't run payroll well, right? So payroll is a thing that was easily automated. We simplified it. Now, when we start adding AI on top of it, we're able to start to actually dig in and have the system find things going on in payroll that maybe we wouldn't have caught. So someone who is changing their direct deposit multiple times in a cycle might be trying to see if they can time it just right so they can get a double pay. There might be situations where you've got someone in your organization, in your system, who can create employees and can also run payroll. That's obviously a pretty big risk because I would be really great at creating all those employees and giving them all my direct deposit number, right? So without a system in place, that means you need a human to go through all of your systems, understand those connections, find all of that. But with AI involved, we actually can be having the system flag that and run it and say, hey, here's a problem. So payroll's still running, that automation is still happening, but the system is adding extra information into the payroll process and giving more guidance. I think that's where the difference is.
Yeah, I definitely think blockchain is certainly one of those that is really going up the hype curve, but I think it's important to pay attention to, and I think it's more than just building a better mousetrap. I think as all of our computer systems evolve and as the maturity evolves, we need new technologies to help us run that. Certainly in the news today, the idea of information security is so important. You see across the board data breaches and folks getting really concerned around how much they're putting out into the universe, whether it's social media or even inside of their corporate systems. So blockchain's one of those technologies that can come in and help a new situation that perhaps wasn't there 5, 10, 15 years ago. The quantity of data that we have across all of our distributed systems means that all of our companies are a bit at risk. And being able to identify what are those new technologies that can come in and help us still automate as well as keep all of our data safe, I think is an important one. And I think that's where blockchain can come in and help companies really make sure that their employee data and their customer data and certainly their IP is something they feel really secure in its safety. So again, a new problem coming about because of technology, so another one where technology can come in and really try and help out those processes.
Now, we haven't talked about virtual reality yet. Are you doing anything at Kronos with virtual reality?
We're not today. We have a lot of industries that we sell into where they are playing around with virtual reality. We've got some retail folks and some manufacturing folks who are starting to think about it. It's not something my team has started to invest in, but really interested to hear about some of the applications that folks are interested in and starting to play with.
And what about Papaya Global? Have you used virtual reality for anything?
So we are mainly ignoring virtual reality, to be honest. We actually didn't find a use case to use virtual reality in a way that we feel that it will really provide value, because in some places where we want human to manage the processes, mainly onboarding, termination processes, things that are related to have real interaction with people and with employees, we feel that virtual reality will only create a very much of distraction in the process. So maybe in a year time I'll speak differently, but currently we go for not.
And what about Oracle?
So the way we see virtual reality is right now, it's still very much company dependent. Because if you think about where you really want to apply virtual reality, the two use cases we hear the most are in recruiting, because I want to give a candidate a sense of what's it like to work here, or, hey, you're going to be joining a call center, let's have a day in the life with you in the virtual reality helmet so you can actually see what you would be doing. Or in training, we need to give somebody a very specific example of how they're going to fix a machine or something like that before they're actually standing and allowed to touch the equipment. So both of those are really great examples, but they're not necessarily part of the process. They're kind of the content that feeds into the process. And we tend to kind of draw a line there where we say when we get to content, that really is company specific. So we like to say we could certainly connect to it if you want to have that in your recruiting process or in your learning process, but we're not actually developing virtual reality capabilities right now.
Okay. May all your realities be real, apparently. Well, as we look at these, how are we going to apply these kind of technologies to HR? It's so often, I think, and I came from a tech company at one point in time too, we get so involved in our technology, we want to tell you about technology, as opposed to the value to you as a consumer, particularly in HR. How does this fit in the HR world? Is it going to matter?
I think it absolutely will. I think what's important, and I've heard it a couple of times in some of the other sessions today, it's really important to know what problem you're trying to solve. It's really important to look at your business processes, your HR processes, and what are the real challenges you're trying to solve? Is it around speed? Is it around turnover? Is it around employee engagement? And really seeing how could traditional technologies help in that space, or how could some of these innovative technologies really help? One way blockchain will most likely manifest itself first is in employee and applicant verification, right? So in today's job market, right, turnover and hiring the right employee is so important. And really being able to validate that who's coming in and applying is who they say they are. is really one of those big challenges right now for folks. And I think that's where blockchain with that known entity and that secure record information will really be able to help. Imagine an applicant has a secure record that has their background data and their resume data and their employment data in this known, secure, distributed environment. And just at the flick of a switch, they can offer that out to the company who's looking at them and looking to verify their background. We've had a couple of challenges personally in our group lately as we've been hiring, where folks have been really distributed and they've been in these locations geographically where it hasn't been easy for them to reach out and validate some of these verifications, their background checks and their employee verification. But imagine if they didn't have to pick up a phone and call their previous employer and say, yes, it's okay to speak to this new company. Imagine they could just do that really quickly and securely, and the company that's looking to hire them trusts that source. So that's probably the first place we'll start to see blockchain really come into play, but it's important for that to be a challenge that you're trying to solve for, and not just looking at new technologies, just to have an innovation in your life cycle.
Well, so would that mean that you don't need background checking at the end as much as you get verification at the beginning? Is that?
Exactly, exactly.
So I think a key thing with that, though, is we need to think about, is this where your biggest problem is?
Exactly.
I think, much as I appreciate that example, blockchain in many organizations, that might be using a very giant hammer to hit a very tiny nail. So let's make sure that as you're thinking about it, that you're exploring and saying, this is a problem, we can't verify, we're having it as a challenge, we want to bring the technology in here. If you're not having that problem, just adding blockchain, it's going to make something that is great already that much better. Is that really going to add that much productivity to your organization? So I think a key thing is to think about, where is the business challenge? And then how is AI helping that business challenge to make you more productive or make your employees more engaged, that sort of a thing. So blockchain is a great example if we're talking background checks. I've heard a couple customers of ours exploring it on the benefits side, where they're talking about someone might be returning to work after a leave and they might have some medical records that they want to share, but they need to have them very closely secured. Haven't built it yet, seems interesting, something to explore. But I think what the most important thing is, it shouldn't be, here's my business process and then I sprinkled in some AI on top of it and now it's good. What needs to happen is that AI needs to be part of that business process and helping you make a better decision, whether that's in recruiting or learning or career development or payroll, no matter what it is. The important thing is it's part of the process, and the technology is improving the process, not just something that gets added on after the fact.
So for us, when we look at blockchain, we are looking, and Jessica mentioned here before that we are all concerned about our privacy. But when you think about it, when you are managing payroll, you do have an access to every single detail of every individual that you are managing. And when we ask our clients, how do you transfer those payroll data today globally when you need to process payroll in specific countries? And in 90% of the time, they will tell us, we sent the information by emails. So somebody is taking my personal information, my social security number, my bank account, my name, my family member's name, my birth date, and everything that actually a hacker needs in order to create a duplication of my identity over an email to a payroll provider anywhere around the world. When we think about that, for us, this is the biggest breach out there in how companies is managing data. So obviously those things sometimes are not heading the major headlines, but under the GDPR regulation and with having more and more hacks going every day, I do believe that blockchain is going to be the very basic standard of transferring data, because transferring personal data, it's not only about medical records, which is super important, but it's about protecting my identification. And I think that every organization has this obligation towards its employees and workers currently. And if we breach this obligation and this trust that we have between the two parties, actually the outcome can be very, very severe. So this is where we see blockchain as a very, very big distributor and actually a game changer in this role of employee-employer relationship and ensuring that privacy is being kept.
We see that actually even almost in the opposite, where you're dealing with employees who might be in rural or underserved areas of the globe, whether it be folks in, we've got a lot of customers with agriculture, in the agriculture industry, and that's one where they've got a lot of challenges in paying their folks. And you know, they don't always want to use global cash cards, or they don't want to use payday loans, which is where that underserved market is really being hit from. So could we have a more distributed way of paying these underserved employees and doing it in a very secure way, which is the challenge today.
Well, we have a little game in a way here. We were looking at these, and probably one of the questions that you're asking yourself at this point is, well, what are these professionals here recommending for you today, right now, in terms of these three technologies? And they have a card that says, you should invest, you should wait, you should study up on it, or you should totally ignore it. So I'm going to ask them, in these three technologies, what they are thinking today. And I have no idea what they're going to say, by the way, nor do they about each other, I believe. And let's just see what their advice is to you about these three kinds of technologies today. Why don't we start with AI? I'll give them a minute to whip out their answers for you. To invest, to wait, to study, or to ignore. Okay, we have two people who think it's ready for prime time and one study up on. Okay, now what about blockchain? Let's look at blockchain. What do our panelists think on that one?
Sorry.
No?
The opposite way.
Isn't it wonderful that they don't agree? It could be really boring if they had no diversity of opinion here. Huh? And what about virtual reality? We look at virtual reality. Where does that fit?
Oh my God.
Well, nobody said ignore it, so in any of these, so thank you. So let's kind of end up, before we start with looking at your questions too, because you've all been very informative here about some really, really sophisticated technologies. And what is what is the so what for the audience? If we're HR practitioners today, what do we really need to take away? What's your advice? Talk to us.
Okay, well, give me a platform. So my so what? Don't get caught up in the terminology. Look at what is actually underneath it. As you're exploring these things, talk to vendors about what they're delivering, and don't get caught up in the marketing of it. It's really great to see the super cool demos. I write them myself. And see, what could be, and we all want you to be inspired, but we also want you to be thinking about what are you actually going to do that is pragmatic, that's going to make an impact in your organization. So focus in on what you're really trying to accomplish from a business perspective, and then think about what the technology can do to help you in that direction.
Yeah, I really agree. I was almost thinking about the previous session that they had in here talking about pilot programs, right? And running a pilot program with one of your vendors when you're looking to invest in a new technology. And I think that's something that could actually be applied to using new technology, right? Once you've done that investigation into what are the areas of your business processes you want to try and invest in, actually reach out to some of those vendors who could help you with some of these new technologies. If you've identified one or two that you think on top of more traditional technologies you might want to think about, actually reach out to those vendors and have conversations with them. I know when we're talking to our customers, we want to be really transparent about what are the algorithms we're developing underneath our AI strategy, and we really want to partner with those customers to make sure that those technologies and those algorithms that we're building are really solving the most important problems for them. So these vendors can really work with you and run a program, a pilot program, and see how it works, test it out, and you know, don't be afraid to iterate and double back on something rather than completely investing. Maybe you wait 6, 9, 12 months and see how the technology evolves and then go back and revisit it. But you know, these technologies are up and coming, and they will really be helping you to solve problems that maybe today you didn't even realize you had. So definitely worth some additional investment in studying and research.
So for me, HRTech is about tackling issues, pains, and finding the right solutions. And technology is not a solution. Technology is tools. So having great tools in the organization, saying, yeah, we're using AI, VR, blockchain, it's really, really great. But if you don't know the problem that they are going to be solving, if they are not going to make your company much better in terms of internal procedures, in terms of employees' retention, in terms of things that are really saving times and ensuring that your company work as a better company towards the world, it's not worth it. It's gonna, I mean, people tend to think that technology is super easy to adapt and to implement. Technology and integration takes time. And if you don't have a clear path towards what you are trying to solve, it's not going to last, because technology is not exciting if you don't understand, if it's not going to solve a real issue in the organization.
Mm-hmm. And I have a question for you all, because all of this technology is algorithmically, if that's a word, run. And how do we make sure in a world of where decisions are being made by a machine that the bias of the engineers who created it isn't represented in the software, or that whatever the assumptions is don't represent whatever your company really wants to see in the answers that's coming from the machine? Or what if it breaks? How will you know?
I think that's where the human aspect comes in, right? It's making sure that when you're looking at these results that might come out of one of these AI algorithms, that you're looking at it and does this feel right, right? There's always that gut feel. Does this feel right? Does this match against other decisions we've made in the past? Does this match our employee engagement that we feel we have, right? You're always going back and doing those double checks across some of these processes. And I think that's an important piece that we can't lose in this.
It will break, for sure. More than you think. Technology is not the answer, sustainable, and that's it. We can all go home and spend some time at the beach. We need humans to verify it. We need to ensure that we create also verification processes of everything. So technology is about creating better ways to get to your final result. But in every aspect, on every aspect of the way, you will have verification places where people need to ensure that things are being made correctly, and that there are not mistakes on basically on the initial procedures that we defined internally. Because you're right, I mean, machine at the end of the day, they can only know the things that we defined and agreed on. And if we didn't define it properly, that's not going to serve for the purpose.
So I think it all comes back to someone has to be driving. There has to be someone looking at it. If the machine is making recommendations, that's not making the decisions, that's making the recommendations. And you're going to check very quickly that the machine is recommending only 40-year-old white males get hired, we might have a problem. So as a way to kind of make sure you've got that check and balance, you are going to need someone to go back and look at how is the system driving, what recommendations is it making, and then is it leading you to the outcomes. It's kind of similar that, you know, I trust Google most of the time when I'm driving, but there are times when I look at the map and I say, you know what, this is what the map is telling me, but I live here, and I know it's going to be faster for me to go a different direction, right? Same thing when you're thinking about this technology. The technology is going to be telling you, giving you guidance, giving you direction, but you still are the one who knows your organization, your business, and what you're trying to accomplish. So if that means that you need to take a reset and say, let's look at the data, maybe we need to go back and change, and rather than looking at the entire history of our company's usage, we want to just look at the last year because we had a strategic shift and we want the system to start from last year and start forecasting from that rather than bringing in 10 years worth of history. Those are the kinds of decisions that you're going to need to make as you're guiding the AI to really get to adding value for your organization.
So does that mean that we should be telling HR leaders today that somebody in their organization has to be able to look at the algorithm in a piece of technology, maybe before they buy it, and understand what that algorithm is doing?
I wouldn't say necessarily, so if you want to sit down with us and run through our machine learning algorithms, I will be happy to provide an architect and you can do that. I don't think that's necessarily going to be the most valuable thing. I think the more important thing is to spend time understanding how is the AI being used in the process and understanding what possible outcomes that could have. So again, if you're looking at it in recruiting and you're using the system to recommend someone for hire, then you need to understand how comfortable are we going to be with trusting that recommendation. If the recommendation is for a salary adjustment or an offer amount, and you're saying, hey, if I give this person this salary rate, I'm 80% likely for them to accept, but if I gave them a sign-on bonus, they might go to 90% likely. That's something where the system is giving guidance, but you're still making the decision to hire. You're still making the decision that this is the person. Now the system is negotiating or helping you come up with what's the right package. So again, you need to think about where is the system going to be adding value to your process. And in a lot of cases, this is going to be about trust. I'll tell you, 10 years ago, when I introduced predictive analytics into our software, and we had flight risk, and we had likelihood that someone was going to be a top performer. And at the time, most HR people were like, absolutely not. I do not trust the machine. I do not want the system telling me this. This is absolutely not. I was like, wow, I'm way ahead of the market. But what's happened over time, people see it, and they like it, and they like seeing those factors. And again, in that case, it's an early warning system. We're not saying do anything. We're saying this is a trend that is coming, and you need to think about it. So the most important thing is not necessarily that you understand the ins and outs of the technology of the algorithm, but what you do need to understand is what data is it pulling in, and then if you're not liking where the outcomes are trending, what can you do to adjust it? Those are the two most important questions there.
I totally agree. I think that ignore the technology, ignore the buzzwords, okay? When you're buying something, just look at the outcome, what it's in it for you. If you can run a POC, proof of concept, to do it, ensure that you understand how your life's gonna look before and after, and what's the outcome out of technology, if you're gonna have more accessible data, if you're gonna be able to make decisions much faster, if you're gonna be able to get rid of very manual processes and lots of processes that have tons of mistakes. But don't be focused on the technology aspect. Be focused on what's the outcome of the technology, how it's going to affect your company, how it's going to change your life in person, and how it's going to look when you are implementing it within your company. Because every product has its own structure, and not every product fits every company. It's very easy to think, oh, we just need to customize this and this and this, and then it's going to be perfect, and those customization can take a year time. And maybe it's not even on the seller roadmap. So just ensure that you really understand how it fits your needs and understand the solution and not the technology behind it.
And I would recommend you take a little bit of time to understand not the structure and not the underlying architecture, but understand the data being used, but also how that algorithm is taking that data and guiding and making that recommendation to you. So rather than just sitting back and waiting for the results and then saying, does this feel right? Maybe the more you learn, the more you study, and just having a little bit of an additional nugget of information around how this can help your processes, I think will help you make better decisions around this type of technology. So I think we're all a little bit more sophisticated around some of these technologies than we were, say, 10, 15 years ago. And I think that additional learning on this type of platform will remain in place and will really help you make some of those decisions.
Great, and I want to make sure that our audience has time to ask you all some questions. So I'm anticipating that you must have questions for our panel.
Hi, I'm Kara. I work for HR department in a software security company, actually. So security is very important to us. And thank you for all the clarity. It was really good. I'm really interested in blockchain in terms of, and you started to speak of this, so I just wanted to understand a little bit more practically speaking what that would look like, in particular with employee records. And of course, we're in the same boat where our core employee records are in a database and it's feeding into benefits, multiple global benefit systems. It's feeding into payroll, and it's going into these other third-party people. And I'm wondering, practically speaking, how could blockchain help us with that to ensure that it's a secure transfer? Because, like you said, we're doing all the things that.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah.
So how folks are starting to use it, so I talked about how Bitcoin is using it across a distributed set of public computers, how some of the first applications in sort of private industry will start using it is probably in a private chain of computers. So how that might start to look is there could be a service that you might adopt or employ that will have that private chain of systems that you feel confident in housing your data and housing your records in. And that underlying infrastructure will use that blockchain technology, but they'll use it across a set of private computers, and then that technologist or that service will then make itself available to you to be able to house your records and your information on. So it'll most likely be a service with an underlying hardware component to it. In all honesty, there's not a lot of these folks out there today making this service available. There are some folks in the finance area, some in the legal contracting area that have built up these private networks for themselves to use. And then folks are starting to really invest in it and think about it in terms of making it a service they make available to other companies and corporations to use. So you'll start hearing a little bit more about that in the upcoming, I would say, 18, 24 months or so.
So it sounds like there might actually be another authority organization that might get involved here.
Exactly. I don't see it most likely being something you as an individual company would invest in building out. It could be, depending on how mainstream the technology comes, but I believe at first it'll be a service that you would go out and start to utilize from a third party.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yep.
And we have a question over here.
Yes, thank you for your thoughts on these emerging technologies. Regarding blockchain, if a job applicant could present you with their background, what would make you trust that it was complete and true?
Yep.
Part one. And part two is, what would you screen for to complete the process after having been presented with static information? Thank you.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the second part first. So the screening process will not be different based on the underlying technology, right? So those areas that you're screening for today, based on your business, what you're hiring for, will still remain in place. The difference is do you trust, and my hypothesis is you will trust more this entity or this record that is being delivered out to you. So these pieces of information or these records of information will be, again, distributed across multiple systems, which make it more secure. Each one of those records will have an individual encryption key on it. And it's that individual encryption key that houses not only the information in that record, but it houses the entire history of that record. And because that record has the history and it's also contained across multiple computers, servers, instances, the ability to go in and change that information by a third party is that much harder. They would have to go in and change that information, having that encryption key, but then also going across all those systems. So again, I think for us, as we start to think about it in HR, it's who's going to make this service available to us, and have we all learned enough about this underlying technology to feel confident in it? And I think that's the key piece, right? We all believe there's a bit of hypothesis there that it will be the secure, trusted entity that we're saying it is today. but it needs to be proven over time. So far it has been proven, but it needs to continue to prove it in each of those scenarios that it's being used in.
And I think the key thing there is it's still in its infancy, right? So it's a great idea, especially in cases where we really have problems with verifying. However, what I hear most right now is, can I just apply with LinkedIn? I don't want to go through all the other effort to secure this and manage this and that sort of a thing. So there's an element there of it's a great opportunity, especially if you have had issues where you need to provide very specific validation of degrees, certifications, anything like that, that in the past has been hard to get to. Huge value that could come from that. But again, I think we're in the very early stages of it.
Thank you very much.
William, you have a question.
I do. Blockchain is one of those things I decided to ignore a few years ago. I'm ashamed to admit it, just like the Arab-Israeli conflict, because I know it will never be settled in my lifetime. So why keep up on the details of it? But I am now interested in blockchain, and I'd love to, well, first of all, I don't understand in the recruiting use case that you give why it's better than a really secure record somewhere or better than a LinkedIn profile, which will be kept up to date by the candidate. That's the first question. The second is, what are your other use cases in HR for it?
Yep, so I think some of the other scenarios, so we talked a little bit about it's in its infancy, right? And it's one of those technologies that as it grows, we're all going to become more comfortable with it. I wouldn't stand here today and say you should invest in a third-party record system that you don't feel confident in, right? You have to feel confident in it. Some of the other scenarios we've been looking at, Gretchen mentioned one around benefits administration, and not just in the HR space, but imagine using this for all that HIPAA data, right? Making sure that you're owning your own personal health record and making sure it's used and distributed only when you feel comfortable with it. You're unlocking the key to your own data. So I see it in the benefits administration and that carrier connection piece. I see it in payroll, as we said earlier, across distributing that information. I mean, you mentioned, right, it's a huge risk when we're delivering out all this pay information out into the ether that we're doing it in a trusted way. And then employment records, and really a company's real key information around their employees and how they're managing them can be an important part of their own IP, and that's important in and of itself to keep
I think the through line here, when you're thinking about where blockchain is right now, in terms of use cases, is it's really about individual information owned by the employee. So we're not hearing a lot right now of blockchain examples of company-to-company connections or other things where we're trying to transfer from a process standpoint. What we are exploring right now really is if it's my information, and this kind of goes back, I keep coming back to healthcare, but for those of you who were around when patient-centered healthcare first started, the whole mantra was nothing about me without me, right? When we're thinking about blockchain, I think in a lot of cases in HR, we're thinking the same thing. What information are you as an individual providing the company, whether that is your recruiting information or your personal payroll required information or your health information, and then how can you trust that it's secure?
Right. I'd like to thank our panel. I'm afraid we've run out of time. We have a question here, and I saw several others with questions that sat down. So please feel free to hunt us up after this session if we'd love to answer your questions for you.